We're coming to the end of the first week of official campaigning for both sides on the European Stability Treaty, and despite both the yes and no camps very actively setting out their stalls, for many voters, confusion still reigns. Joining me now, Minister for Social Protection, Joan Burton, and the Deputy Leader of Sinn Féin, Mary Lou Mcdonald. Good morning and welcome to you both. We want to talk about the European Stability Treaty, and I'll stay with you, Mary Lou. First of all, your campaign got off to a bit of a shaky start when you were using the quotations from economists. It's a bit like those reviews of movies or books where they take one sentence from an excoriating review and use it on the poster to sell the book or the film. So you used economists' views to suggest that they were all for a no, when in fact they were all for a yes.
Well, we didn't do that, and in fairness to the economists concerned, I don't think they reacted in such a het-up way as maybe some others in the political sphere. What we were pointing out was that each of these economists had identified very serious and very deep flaws in respect of this treaty. And what it does raise is the fact that even those who advocate a yes, and let me acknowledge that all of those persons are of that view, that even they recognise that this treaty won't stabilise the euro, is not a panacea for our ills, is deeply flawed and deeply problematic. And the interesting thing is that each of them...
But they were all voting yes.
Yes, they've stated that.
So in spite of all the reservations, and you can look at the flaws,
sure,
they were still saying, at the end of the day, as economists, we weigh it up and down, and we obviously share some of the thoughts of Sinn Féin on this matter, but on balance, as the people skilled in these matters, we are voting yes.
And that is their view, and that's where we part company with them. So we agreed that the treaty is flawed, is not the answer to our problems, in fact could lead us and will lead us into deeper problems. We agreed that austerity isn't working. Where they part company with us is a view around the ability of the state, should the need arise, to access emergency funding. And I suspect that's one of the issues that we're going to debate out
We
here
are
this
indeed,
morning.
because you got another uppercut, really, from the Referendum Commission yesterday, when the Sinn Féin position is that we could access funds, and the Referendum Commission pointed out that the ability to veto the bailout is now gone.
Well, they didn't exactly say that, Pat, and if you could just give me a minute just to maybe explain to listeners what's at play here. There's really three bits to what's happening. On the 31st of May, people will be asked to vote on the austerity treatment, new rules, new very tough targets in respect of borrowing and investment in this state on an ongoing basis. Aligned with that is the plan to set up an emergency fund for the Eurozone, which is a very worthy thing and a very necessary thing. And the Referendum Commission is tasked with giving an account just of the austerity treaty. There is a linkage, and the Referendum Commission identified it, between the austerity treaty and this potential bailout. That is true.
They did point out that the treaty is quite specific, that Ireland will not be able to access.
It doesn't say Ireland. It states the linkage between this austerity treaty and the bailout fund. But here's the critical bit of it. And in fairness, the Referendum Commission acknowledged this point yesterday when they were speaking, and it was carried on RTE. The bailout fund is not yet established. In order for it to be established, this state has to give it the nod. It has to come through in legislative form. And
they said that yesterday. Right. It has to go through the House of the Oireachtas. Therein
lies the nub of not just the Sinn Féin argument, but the analysis of others.
Okay, but hang on a second. You're saying that we could actually, by not passing it, you're saying, and we'll come to the Minister on this, by not passing it, that we could actually stop the existence of this.
Yes.
And where would we get the money then? If we vote no and it's there, obviously we don't get the money according to the Referendum Commission. If we vote it not to be there in the first place, where do we still get the money?
Well, hold on. The objective of the exercise is not to stop an emergency fund coming into being. The objective of the exercise is to remove a condition from the bailout, which I have to say was put in very late in the day, which this government should never have agreed to, which links access to emergency funding with the passing of this treaty. And the critical political point is this, that the government can do that. The government has ample scope to do it. The government should never have let this scenario unfold.
Minister, you've heard the Sinn Féin argument when the Referendum Commission said that it was quite clear in the treaty that Ireland could not access these funds if the ESM is put in place. But Mary Lou is saying, well, you've got your opportunity. It hasn't been ratified by the Dáil yet, so you can actually throw a spanner in the works.
Well, first of all, it might be useful to look at what the ESM is, the European Stability Mechanism. This is a fund of 700 billion, which is designed to provide for a future of stability and structure in relation to the euro as a currency union, as a currency zone that is the currency of this country. Secondly, it's designed to assist those countries which get into trouble to recover. Now, my difficulty with Sinn Féin is why on heaven or earth would Sinn Féin decide that we should veto the development of a fund which down the road this country, as we leave the IMF Troika process and we re-establish our financial independence, we would have access to this fund as a safety net. I laughingly said last weekend, it's a bit like, do you want to dive in off the deep end of the pool when the country goes back to financial independence, or would you prefer maybe to have the water wings, the ESM? Why does Sinn Féin say that we should veto access to a fund?
What she seems to be saying is that you can actually, by vetoing it, use it as a political weapon to get this business in the ESM structure, in the treaty, rather.
So just let me say this. This is Sinn Féin saying, let Ireland stand alone.
No,
let Ireland do stuff that no other country does. When Ireland has very considerable financial difficulties that the people of this country have made enormous sacrifices to actually get ourselves out of. We're about halfway there. We exit and we go back to the markets sometime after 2013-14. And Sinn Féin is saying, oh, hold on, we're so well off that we can ignore the safety net. I don't, in ordinary logic, leave the economics out of it. Why would you refuse a safety net from countries that we have been partners with? Next Thursday marks the 40th. Next Thursday marks the 40th anniversary of the Irish people voting to be members of the European Union. Why would you repudiate access to 700 billion?
To put this in practical context, we're, say, going to the markets in 2014. And we are not able to avail of the bailout funds. And there's a situation where the markets say, 10%, 12%, 16%. On the other hand, we go to the markets, we have the bailout funds, they say 12%. You say, no, we have the bailout. Sorry, we're going back there and we're going to get it at 2%. That's the argument the minister's putting.
Can I just note that the minister made a very different argument. She said that we're arguing for us going it alone. We're making no such argument. And by the way, Minister, we're all too aware of the consequences of the austerity programme being pursued by your government. I know that story only too well. This isn't about preventing the potential bailout mechanism. That's not a matter of controversy. Everybody has agreed that fund is necessary. The point at issue here is the conditions that your government agreed to, which said, in order for us to get those monies, we have to sign up to a new set of rules and regulations to be enforced, underwritten and given constitutional protection that will lead to more austerity. And what we're saying very plainly and very simply is that politically and legally there still remains that opportunity and that leverage for the government to say, yes, absolutely, for a bailout fund, but no, you cannot make it conditional upon ongoing austerity and a further transfer of decision-making and powers in respect of budgets, how we raise taxes, how we spend money away from this state and Minister, into the hands of the European Union.
She wants you in the Dáil to turn down the ESM so that you can go back to the well, renegotiate it, so that it can be accessed?
I recall when a previous government came in and said unilaterally this country would do a bank guarantee. And I recall on that night Sinn Féin voted for that proposition on that night. All I can say is we would be, in my view, seriously derelict as a government to say that in any shape or form we would, on behalf of the Irish people, turn our backs on access to 700 billion of funding.
That is not what you're being asked to do,
Sorry,
Minister.
just let me, I didn't interrupt you now. Just let me say that since the Maastricht Treaty, since the development of the euro, since the Stability and Growth Pact, all European countries have been asked to keep their deficit to 3% and below. There's actually nothing new, Mary Lou, in the menu. Just let me make a point now. There's actually nothing particularly new in the menu, except that the preamble to the treaty, and I hope that Sinn Féin might agree with this, says that the treaty is about promoting conditions for stronger economic growth in the European Union area, and it's for governments to help governments to maintain sound and sustainable public finances. Now, just let me say this.
Can we
in terms of creating sound and sustainable public finances for this country, which is the critical issue. We have to get people back to work. We have to get businesses back.
But you know the approach of Monsieur Hollande is
and I
different.
welcome absolutely the approach of Mr. Hollande.
Mary Lou.
Mr. Hollande, can I just finish this? Mr. Hollande has said what is the proposal of the Labour Party, that on the one hand you sort out your household finances, and on the other side you have a growth and investment pact.
Okay, but he wants
that.
Adjustments to the fiscal treaty,
whereas
we have not sought those.
For growth and investment.
Sorry, Pat, just to make this absolutely clear, there is nobody arguing against an emergency fund for the euro. And don't try and misrepresent people, Minister. You talk about dereliction of your duty. The great dereliction of your duty was that you allowed, in the first instance, this link, in terms of access to the funding, be conditional upon heaping more austerity and cutbacks on the people of this state. Can I say further?
Hang on. I want to clarify something with Mary Lou.
Allow me to finish my point, Pat. Yeah. It is a further dereliction of your duty if you fail to do what is legally possible and necessary, and use the opportunity to ensure that that conditionality in terms of future access to the emergency funds is removed. And let me just say this for your listeners, because it's important that they understand this. As we speak, bailout funds, emergency funds in EU law are illegal. The treaties have to be changed to place them on a legal and sound footing. And it is for that reason that the new fund requires the consent of this state and the ratification of the law.
All right, but you want this bailout fund?
We need a bailout fund.
Now here is the question. I think I'll clarify this.
Yeah.
In going to get a bailout, if we prove to be profligate in the way that we have used our national resources, you go to your bank manager and he says, but you took 10 holidays last year, you spent the money on this, that and the other, I'm not going to give you any more. If you commit to the Stability Pact, you are saying we will not be profligate, we will balance our books. So in the event that, in spite of balancing or attempting to balance your books, you still have a catastrophe that obliges you to go to the bailout fund, the bank manager will say, well, you've done your best, God love you, we'll give you the money. Sure. However, if you've been profligate, we're not going to give you the money.
Sure.
Now, is this what the Stability Pact is all about? Is just saying to you, it's a way of demonstrating that you're not being profligate, that you're being sensible?
It's about nothing of the sort. And I certainly, and Sinn Féin does not advocate profligacy or wasting public monies. Far from it. They need to be used judiciously and in an effective manner. What this treaty is actually about is imposing conditions on the state in respect of, on the one hand, our ability to borrow, but more crucially, our ability to invest. And I think your listeners know, given the circumstances we're in, with nearly 500,000 people out of work, the domestic economy on the floor, huge emigration, that we've tried the approach of cutting our way and cutting costs in terms of bridging the deficit and getting ourselves out of the hole. That hasn't worked. So what we need to go to now is a strategy that is about investment, developing jobs and increasing revenues to the state and growing our way out. And the rules, as enforced under this treaty, would seriously hamper not just this government, and this is important, crucially, future governments to take those kinds of decisions in the best interests of the state and the citizens. What it would allow is the European Commission, the European Court of Justice, to make a call in the case where they viewed that Ireland would have been deemed to have broken the rules, to fine us, to force us into what they call partnership agreements, which would be almost like mini bailout circumstances, and take the proper authority from an elected government to make the decisions that properly reside with them.
Well, can I just say that we are at the moment, as a government, recreating Ireland's reputation and status and standing. We're part of the European Union, and I make no apology for saying to listeners we want access to this 700 billion. Sinn Féin are saying that we can in some way or other frustrate the coming into being of an actual fund to help countries in distress, that as a political tactic or ploy, we frustrate the development of the ESM, and somehow or other that makes everybody else in the European Union feel obligated towards Ireland. The second thing I want to say is that at the moment we are enjoying a very strong interest from multinational companies to come and invest in Ireland. PayPal, 1,000 jobs in Dundalk. Okay. Apple, 500 in Cork. Now, this is important. We are slowly building our reputation. We're persuading.
You think it would be damaging if we said no? Is that the simple point?
Well, I think it would bewilder foreign investors who are using Ireland as a base for investment in the European Union, and we're selling the country as such a base in order to generate employment.
Minister, can I say to you, I'm not asking you to frustrate anything. I'm insisting, and I think the Irish electorate should insist, that you and your very well-paid colleagues do your job. And your job is to protect and serve the best interests of this state and its citizens.
Okay, but what about the point that the Minister made a moment ago? And we'll come back to her on austerity not working, because quite clearly it's problematic over Europe. But that business, we say no, we bewilder foreign investors who say, I thought you guys you are our gateway to Europe. We don't want you to put yourselves in the situation where there's talk of maybe one country leaving the Eurozone, maybe more, who knows. We don't want any uncertainty. If we're going to put a couple of 100 million into a plant in Ireland, we don't want any ambiguity.
Well, can I say to you, Pat, the only thing that will cause an uncertainty or ambiguity is if the Minister and her colleagues insist on raising red herrings like this. We're a member of the European Union. Well, let me finish. We're a member of the European Union. That's not a matter that's up for debate. That's established, in fact.
Hold on.
We're part of the Eurozone. The euro is our currency. There's no talk about us exiting the euro. The objective here has to be clearly about stabilising the currency.
No, but long term, in restructuring the euro, which everyone says was flawed at the beginning, it was a political project rather than a monetary project.
Absolutely.
That something may happen. And the point, are we putting ourselves in sort of no man's land?
I don't believe we are. And you've mentioned the formation of the euro, which of course was 20 years ago this year, 1992, Maastricht. I remember that debate very clearly because that was a huge long-term decision for us. But the political class really didn't allow a debate to happen. What happened was Albert Reynolds went to Brussels, came back with structural funds, and we were told it's all about the money, short-term, blinkered thinking. And the downside and the dangers and the jeopardy produce were entirely ignored. And this government is trying the same approach.
I want to talk to the listeners about rebuilding investment in this country. And I'm delighted that Mary Lou mentioned the issue of structural funds and regional funds for this country. Because I want to say to Mary Lou and to the people in Sinn Féin that the European Union has the capacity, the best investment in Ireland that kick-started so much development and growth in education, in innovation, in regional development was in fact the structural and European funds. She chooses to denigrate this now because Sinn Féin are just frankly opposed to everything. If we want investment and growth, given where the country unfortunately is at the moment, Mary Lou, what we actually want is a further growth and investment pact by Europe. And that is something that my colleagues in government are determined to negotiate.
No, but you see the approach that Monsieur Hollande has taken.
Not at all.
Monsieur Hollande is doing the correct thing. He's talking about a growth and investment pact. Mary Lou has just denigrated structural funds that this country got 20 years ago. All I can say is that in terms of growth and investment, and I want us to talk about this country growing and this country recovering,
but what I'm asking you, Minister, what I'm asking you is
this isn't a growth and investment.
First of all, there was an opportunity, presume, to defer this.
This is the housekeeping side.
To defer this until after we see what Monsieur Hollande, if he becomes President of France, achieves. But we didn't do that. We had an opportunity to put it back.
Well,
so here we have a situation where you're now being locked into a corner on this, what Sinn Féin are calling the austerity treaty, and you have the same treaty which is going to have bells and whistles added by Monsieur Hollande. I mean, it's all a bit politically ham-fisted.
But that's the history of treaties in the European Union. Next Thursday is the 40th anniversary of the people of Ireland, the citizens, freely voting to join Europe. Can I just say that Europe is not perfect, no institution is perfect, but on balance, being members of the European Union has been highly beneficial for this country.
But we're the poster boy for
women.
Austerity, and austerity now it is accepted is not the only solution to this problem.
And so there's two parts, if you like, to this development. That's why I read out the preamble to the treaty, which is about stronger economic growth in Europe. That's the context.
But where's the other half? This is about balancing the books, and every household knows you got to long-term balance the books.
And long-term, it's not
where's
sensible. Long-term, it's not sensible to run a budget deficit. So this treaty is actually about fixing the national housekeeping of this country over a period of time. We're going to have access to the ESM. But the other side is to develop a growth and investment pact. Now, Mary Lou...
Ministry, you know yourself that there's so much control over what we do now in Europe. We're in a temporary little arrangement with the Troika. But the fiscal compact, or treaty, European Stability Treaty, as it's been called, Mary Lou has characterised it that people can call us to order if we decide that our economy is in the doldrums a little bit. We want to go into deficit to stimulate it, and a country, maybe one of our competitor countries, says to us, sorry, you're not going to do that. We're going to take you to court on this.
But this is an issue for the European Union as a whole, and the biggest problem that the European Union has is the unfortunate number of people who are out of work. So this is not just an Irish issue. If the European Union is to grow and to prosper, we have to get people back to work. And I would say to Mary Lou, far from denigrating what Albert Reynolds did in getting structural funds for Ireland, we actually need a growth and investment pact. Sinn Féin have to accept that they're playing politics.
Wouldn't you have been better off, by the way, if Mr. Hollande won, say, a new tranche of structural funds to be dispersed to countries in trouble, and then you go to the country, you might have less difficulty in persuading people one way or the other. Yes, Mary Lou.
Can I just say this, that the Minister is obviously hell-bent on discussing everything from a needle to an anchor, bar the actual proposition that will be put to people on the 31st of May. Yes or no, whichever way, in the event of a no vote, we're still a member of the European Union, we're still a member of the euro currency, and we will still have to come from a position where we change tack. Minister, you've had a good run at it.
Where do we get the money
from? Cutbacks
Where do we get the money? Where do we get the money?
Into a strategy of investment. You've talked about denigration and dereliction of duty. You've mentioned Monsieur Hollande. Monsieur Hollande, and indeed no other French leader, is quite so lily-livered and frankly pathetic in as the governments that we've had here in terms of defending the rights and the interests of their state and of their people. I wish to God you'd follow suit. You ask me, where do we get the money? You know full well, in respect of an immediate package for job stimulus, the discretionary fund from the pension fund is there, the European Investment Bank is there, and you know full well, when you ask about the potential for further emergency funding, you know full well, Joan, that we will
Mary
have
Lou,
access
you know,
to those funds.
you know you've been accused of gonzo economics.
Of what?
Gonzo economics, in other words, bananas economics. Jerry Adams, before the general election, said he wanted to tell the IMF to take their money and be off with them. I mean, you know, and now we're talking about the little bit of money that we might get from the IMF.
Can I tell you what gonzo economics is? Gonzo economics is what has led us to a position where economic sovereignty has been ceded, where people literally are going by the seat of their pants, where our young people are fleeing the country with no prospect or any hope here to the future. That's the reality with which people are dealing with. That's the stuff of gonzo economics.
I think that Sinn Féin are obliged to their colleagues in the No campaign said the other day, and they're your colleagues in the campaign. And
your colleagues are who, Minister? Fianna Fáil?
Your colleagues in the campaign.
The great white hopes of the Irish economy, Fianna Fáil. The ones that you so in such forthright terms condemned and confronted quite correctly in the last
colleagues
are now your colleagues as cheerleaders for cutbacks.
We've tried to balance time as best we can, Minister.
Well, obviously I'm not winning, but your colleagues, Mary Lou, in the No campaign suggested the other day that if we had no access to funding, that we could raise 10 billion in 1 year. They suggested they would do it by raising income tax, a levy, special super tax levies on people earning 100,000. They suggested that they would raise something like 8 to 10 billion. Now, all I can say is that I've studied taxation. I've studied taxation. I just find where they suggested they would get the money from in 1 year, mind you. They then suggested, but there was another recourse, they would go to their new best friend, and Sinn Féin's new best friend, the IMF. The IMF, if we don't actually utilise our access to Europe and we go on our own to the IMF, which we can do, that's perfectly open to us. We already have funds from the IMF, which is something like 16 times a quota of funding that we're allowed. And the people on the no side are suggesting that it would be a breeze to get on the plane over to Washington and somehow get a lot more funds. All I'm saying to Mary Lou and all I'm saying to the listeners is that particular road, as opposed to giving the government in the Constitution the right to sign up to this treaty, have access to a fund, to a safety net of 700 billion, that instead we'd hop on a plane to Washington and throw ourselves at the mercy of the IMF. I don't accept that.
I don't want us thrown at the mercy of anybody, and we are currently at the mercy of the so-called Troika and indeed your government. Sinn Féin consistently, in advance of the last budget, advocated a strategy that would be about closing the deficit. We acknowledge that has to happen. The strategy that has been pursued by your friends in Fianna Fáil and now by yourselves was allegedly to balance the books, as you put it, Pat. But look at the exchequer deficit. In 2008, it stood at 12 billion. 6 vicious budgets, huge cutbacks. You ask yourself, well, have we balanced the book? No. The exchequer deficit up to 2011 had actually doubled. So your strategy is utterly failing. We are not talking about throwing ourselves at the mercy of anybody. We are saying that nobody in their right mind, no more than turkeys would sign up for Christmas, people who have received and are on the receiving end of a failed strategy of austerity, should not give it long-term effect and give it the protection of the Constitution.
Yeah, it's very simple. People have a difficult decision to make at home. They have to do what's best for themselves, for their families and for their community. This treaty offers us access to stability. It offers us the space and the time to reorganise our national budgetary affairs, and it offers in the preamble.
Minister?
It offers in the preamble to the treaty specifically an undertaking about creating conditions for stronger economic growth and for putting people back to work. Well, it's actually not astonishing.
It is utterly astonishing that a senior politician, and this is a fairly straightforward treaty by comparison with other ones.
Well,
it's
I
short.
have it here.
It's
I don't know
short
if you've read it.
Oh, I have.
Perhaps you haven't.
Not alone have I read it. Not alone have I read it. I actually understand it, and I understand that despite the flowery language in the preamble about growth and so on that you've...
So you do admit there is some talk about growth?
There's flowery talk, but there's no substance. There's no... And what people in this state need is not the rhetoric of recovery and jobs. We want the jobs. We want the investment.
But we have to have the funding to do that.
And we will.
With due respect to Sinn Féin, Sinn Féin seem to think that we can magic funds out of thin air. We are being offered access to a 700 billion European stability mechanism, and Sinn Féin are saying that strategically we should frustrate that.
The people, whatever decision they arrive at, understand this. On the 31st of May, you're not coming out to vote yes or no to an emergency fund. That's a related but separate issue that we've gone through earlier. On the 31st of May, you are being asked as citizens whether or not you want to give constitutional protection to the precise detail of what's in this treaty. And the precise detail is about limits in terms of borrowing and therefore investment, additional powers to the European Commission and the Court of Justice, and a strategy that in the long term will tie the hands of this state. We already have conceded all of our powers in relation to the currency and interest rates. Why on earth would we hand over all of our discretion in relation to budgets and fiscal powers? It makes
First of all, I want to say to people listening at home, people have undertaken a lot of sacrifices. We are halfway there. Why would we now turn our backs on the structure of funding, limited and all as they are, that are available to this country for some absolutely uncertain future that Sinn Féin refused to cost? They refused to identify where the money would come from, and they suggest that we would bewilder foreign investors by simply denying the country access to needed funding to hasten the country's economic recovery. I simply have to say, Mary Lou, I fail to understand why Sinn Féin would say play politics and strategically turn down access.
Look, we have to leave it there, and we've still another month to